السلام عليكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I cannot hear you. I cannot hear you.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Okay. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. We start in the name of Allah, the most gracious, most merciful. And we bear witness there is no deity worthy worship except Allah. Praise and glory be to Him. And that Muhammad is the seal of messengers. May peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, his family, his companions, and those who followed his path until the day of judgment. I greet you with greeting of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. This is Dr. Abdul Aziz with you on this Arab Spring show. And we have our guest, Brother Abu Bashir, with us, inshallah. So we just greet you, as we said, with the greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you all. And I pray to Allah, you are all okay, inshallah. In the best state of iman, health, and wealth as well in this difficult situation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give cure to those people who have been infected with this pandemic or all the illnesses as well. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mercy and pardon and give the highest firdaus to those who passed away and give their relatives and their friends patience and great reward. Okay, well, this is the second part of our Arab Spring show, and we spoke last time about Tunisia and how it started almost 10 years ago. And of course, we are just going carrying on that. And today, Brother Abu Bashir with us, inshallah, and he will carry on that as well. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Abu Bashir.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Inshallah, you are all right. Inshallah, family okay, everybody okay.
Jazakallah.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Of course, we spoke last time about Tunisia when it started. We spoke about Syria. Of course, Syria, I think we might come back to it as well again. But today, inshallah, we'll be going for Yemen, isn't it?
Iraq.
Iraq, sorry, yes, Iraq. Right, okay. So, inshallah, in Iraq as well, there was something happened, and there was a chain of events taking place as well there. And inshallah, okay, bismillah, inshallah, we start with Iraq, and just give us a background on the Iraq and how the Arab Spring started there as well.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulihi wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Iraq, very briefly, historically, Muslims entered Iraq about the 15th year after Hijrah, which is about 630 AD. 100 years after, Iraq became the center of the Khilafah, the leadership of the Muslim world, and they built a city there called Baghdad. Baghdad, within a few years, became the capital of civilization in the whole world. It was in Baghdad, believe it or not, there were few libraries, many libraries, public libraries. At that time, the Muslims ruled from China till Spain. In that part of the world, which is, as I said, probably half of the world, there were 400 public libraries. I mean, one of the libraries had 400,000 books, by the way. It's not small libraries. In Baghdad itself, there was one or two libraries, but there were 400 public baths. At that time, probably the whole world did not know what public bath is. Anyway, from Baghdad, because of the libraries, because of the schools, because the Khalifas, the rulers, encouraged knowledge, and they even paid people just to learn or to write books. In Baghdad, most of the Muslim civilization, science, arts, engineering started from there. Briefly, one of their achievements, believe it or not, that 1200 years ago in Baghdad, they measured the circumference and the radius of the earth. So they believed it was spherical. And then they were only far off by about 1 or 2% from today's measurements. But anyway, it's the tradition of Allah that people go up and go down after that for many reasons. Baghdad, Iraq became a third world country. like most of the Asia and Africa, colonized by the Western power, and Iraq was from the share of Britain. In the 1940s, they had semi-autonomy from the British. They had a monarchy there, the Hashemites, the cousins of those who are ruling Jordan now. In 1958, there was a coup against them, military coup, succeeded by many others every few months or every few years by different groups of nationalist and socialist army officers. The army officers, those army officers proved to be just as corrupt as the monarchists before them, but they still did something to Iraq. I have to admit, they did do some development till Saddam Hussein came in 1975, 76, and he started really spending at least some of the country's resources. Iraq at that time, and for many years before and after, was the second biggest oil producer country in the world after Saudi Arabia. And so it's becoming rich, and although I said the regime was corrupt, but they still spent something. So while I'm talking, I like to show some clips about Baghdad in the past and now what happened. Then we'll talk about what happened. So just give me a second. I'll share the screen with you. Okay, so this is Baghdad 1,000 years ago. Can you see it? Yeah?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, just quickly, Baghdad 1,000 years ago. Now this is Baghdad 30 years ago. Still not bad, right? Not bad city really, it's quite nice city, very tidy. I must admit that the last 10 years of Saddam's rule, he really looked after the country. He eliminated, although he was a dictator, that's true, there's no doubt about it, but he didn't oppress his people. Dictator, that means no opposition whatsoever, that's all. But anyway, in his time, according to UNESCO, that Iraq was not a third world country anymore. He eliminated illiteracy, really, in Iraq. The universities were the best in the Arab world, not in the world, but in the Arab world. Standard of education, standard of living. And then somehow they made a mistake, invaded Kuwait. Then there was a sanction against them. The idea of the sanction was to slowly destroy the country. That's what we noticed. I mean, they banned them from importing anything without permission from what they called the United Nations. It wasn't the United Nations, it was America really who decided what goes in. Even pencils, they needed permission to import them, pencils, right? And they had a program called oil for food. That means you export enough oil to get food, as if they were chicken or animals, as if they don't need anything else. Even medicine, they were restricted. That very, very rich country, during those CGs it was sanctioned by the United Nations, but the whole world applied it. Nobody was importing without permission of America, even the Arab countries. During those years, which lasted from 1992 till 2003, till the occupation, 11 years, that very rich country, they did not have medicine even for children, or vaccinations for children. You couldn't afford it. There was no permission. Anyway, then they've decided to finish off Baghdad, Iraq altogether directly. During that year, that sanction, by the way, from 1992 till 2003, 500,000 children died of illness, of sickness, or of disease, of no vaccination, of starvation, right? Then probably they realized they cannot do this forever, the whole world, seeing the Iraqi people dying. They were a population of 25 million. So they wanted to give what you call the last bullet of mercy. They went and occupied Iraq. 2003, they removed Saddam a year after they hanged him, or 2 years after they hanged him. And we thought, okay, now they got rid of the dictator, they got rid of the never founded or never existed weapons of mass destruction. That was the reason for the sanction. They claim that Iraq is about to make a nuclear weapon, and since it's a third country, and then they cannot have nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons only for the Western people. Anyway, and they found nothing. There was no nuclear. It was a mistake. That mistake cost millions of lives. So we are now talking from 2003 till now. Then now that beautiful Baghdad became now this Baghdad, right? After that occupation by the American, this Baghdad, look at it, is it African or Bangladesh or one of the poorest countries in the world? They never had that type of cars before, or this public transport anyway. And the people became so poor, even worse than the time of the sanction. This is people here, Iraqis are going to rubbish dumps and searching for two things, either food to eat, leftover food, or plastic or metals that they can sell. This is how bad it was. When the Americans went in, I must admit, I have to say the truth, that there was resistance to the occupation of the American forces. The Iraqi army was well trained, well equipped, because they had a fight with Iran for 8 years before that. We're talking about the Arab Spring now, not the Iraqi-Iran war, so it doesn't matter who was wrong, who was right, but the Iraqi army was well trained and fit, etc., to fight. But with poverty, how can they? Still, they resisted the Americans. Then the Americans didn't expect that stiff resistance. They thought once they get rid of Saddam, people will be happy. Well, a lot of people were happy, I must admit, but those people start regretting it, because during the Saddam time, at least, they did not have to go to rubbish dumps to pick up food, right? So Americans, faced with very ferocious resistance, they decided to do the old game, divide and rule. So they divided the people there into Sunnis and Shias. They approached the Shias, they couldn't approach the Sunnis were still fighting. They found the Shia easier to approach. So they bribed their big man there, the big reference called Sistani, with $200 million. Now the Shia never admitted that, but the Americans declared that. And the Shia never denied it. Okay, they could say, no, it's nonsense, we never received a penny. So half the population now are not resisting, not only not resisting, they are fighting alongside the Americans, the Sunnis. The Sunnis and the Shias are almost half the population. Give or take a few percentage, nobody knows exactly, but roughly from previous census, there was half the population. So now half the population with the Americans and half with still the Americans found it very hard to fight the Sunnis. As I said, they were well trained and they could hurt the Americans badly. I mean, at the peak of the resistance, they used to carry out 100 to 120 military attacks on the American army. So the Americans couldn't sustain that for long. They found the Shia are more friendlier, especially they bribed them. So they gave them all the authorities in Iraq. And they withdrew most of their forces by the year 2011. By that time, so that's now 8 years from the time they occupied it. During those years, no development in the country whatsoever, only just fighting between the army, the American army and their allies, as well as on the other side, the resistance movement. The people that they set up in Baghdad to rule Iraq were Shia corrupt people, not educated like Maliki and others. They were pro-Iran. And those guys slowly, they allowed Iran to come into Iraq and fill the space that the Americans left. So the Iranians were waiting for this opportunity for many years, probably for 1,000 years. They entered Iraq and they put their men in all the sensitive areas, in the government, in the army, And then even that wasn't enough for them, because they thought if there's an election, although there was an election, and the election always resulted in getting pro-Iran men. So they started sending, or not establishing, militias. And the militias, usually, you don't have in a free country militias. A militia is you have them in an occupied country where you cannot have proper armies. So they established many Shia militias to fight the Sunnis, really, nothing else. Many Shias. When I say many, how many do you think? 120 militias. And where are they getting the money from? The militias? From the Iraqi government. So people were asking, why don't they join the army? No, this is there especially to protect the Shia holy sites. Not 120 men, 120 militias, 120 armies. And they were all ruled by Iran. All of them, the 120, not a single one ruled by Iraqi people themselves. Although the Iraqis were running them, but all the direction, just like Hezbollah in Iraq and Lebanon, that's a very good example, because Hezbollah said, Nasrallah said openly, that's on YouTube, I get my money in dollars from Iran, my orders from Iran, my policies is Iranian policies. He said that openly, the man, he had to say it, right? He said the truth. And the same with those militias. Those militias had one thing in aim, really, that's the aim of Iran, is to really make Iraq irreparable. So due to corruption, etc., suddenly the Iraqis found themselves are getting poorer and poorer. Even Shia scholars, they said, who hated Saddam, they were against Saddam all their life, they said, we have been ruling for 10, 12 years now, and we made the country worse. Now they've been ruling for 19 years, since 2003. During those 19 years, not a single new university was built, not a single road constructed, not a single hospital built in 19 years. And before we coming to ISIS that made things worse, let's look at the statistics of about 2010, 7 years after the American entered. Let's see what happened to Iraq. 1 million widows, that is 2008 and 2009. 1 million orphans, 1 million killed, 800,000 missing. People don't know whether they are in prison, they killed, just missing. They don't come back home. 800,000, 340,000 prisoners, that's official. And the other missing ones, either killed or imprisoned in secret places, in Shia areas, right? 1 million refugee, that figure is much, much more now. But anyway, 1 million displaced inside Iraq. Again, refugees, but within their own country, they call them displaced, and one outside their country. Things still gone worse. Widespread of drug use. I mean, this, for example, this Hezbollah openly trades in opium. They plant it in Baalbek in Lebanon and they export it, and right? Widespread. 3 out of marriages ended up in divorces, right? 40% under poverty line, 40% of the population. That means all the Sunnis almost, right? Pre-planned systematic destruction of the country's infrastructures. As I said, no maintenance of public buildings, of roads, of bridges, no maintenance whatsoever, right? In addition, no maintenance of the cultivated areas, land cultivated areas. So it was getting less and less and less. So they were producing less and less food. I mean, a country that has 2 rivers. They used to say, which is the truth, that Iraq was much richer than Saudi Arabia. All Saudi Arabia produced much more oil. The reason Saudi Arabia lacking 2 things. In population, only a few million people live in about 2 million square kilometers, and in water. While Iraq has always had big population, relatively speaking, 25 million is big population for the size of the country, and 2 rivers, right? So I mean, the Saudis had to import their water, right? Now, again, why in a small country, relatively small country, there were 550 political parties and political groups, didn't call themselves party, but still 500. What we talked about, yes, 126 firms work for foreign intelligence agencies. That means armed 126 armed security firms. Each firm, this work to protect the American personnel, this to protect the diplomatic personnel, this is to protect the parties. Anyway, we talked about 126 armed militias, and those militias, again, they all have one aim: to fight the Sunnis, to fight the Arabs. But why 26? No, so it would be impossible to dismantle them. That's again, I mean, how many national newspapers there are in England? A population of 60 million. In Iraq, 220 national newspapers. Somebody just there, they're fighting really over propaganda. They're fighting over different agendas because they're not quite united, but they're united against one thing, against the Muslim Sunnis there. 45 satellite stations, again, because of the competition. Now look at this, how funny things, funny but sad. Thousands of forged university qualifications, actually tens of thousands. People just bring a paper from Iran, or they just make it with Photoshop, and they say, I'm a qualified doctor, I'm a qualified engineer. Large scale of theft of public properties by the militias. And the militias will go to a public building, government building, and take over. Nobody can, well, they are well armed, nobody can touch them. They go to a land, in the name of fighting ISIS, although we haven't come to ISIS, but in the name of fighting ISIS or terrorism, they will empty a whole village, Muslim Sunni village, and say this became, now just like the Israelis say about the West Bank, this became a restricted military area. Exactly like what the Israelis is doing. This is a restricted military area, so the Palestinians cannot go there, and in Iraq, the Sunnis cannot go there. That's it. A sabotage of farmland. And Iraq now has to import, can you imagine, with 2 rivers and poor people, they have to import tomatoes, all the fruits, the vegetables. Probably they don't eat fruits anymore there. They have to import tomatoes. I don't know how many millions or billions of dollars they have to buy just tomatoes from Iran. There were some rivers common between, other than the Euphrates and Dijla, there were rivers common between Iraq and Iran that comes from Iran towards Iraq and end up in the Arabian Gulf. But what they did, the Iranians, they diverted the water, and again, they made the southern Iraq almost like a desert, right? Now, with all these problems, again, it wasn't enough for them. Then they introduced to us ISIS, and they call it Sunni force. We said before, when we talk about Syria, this ISIS, we don't know where they come from. A group that has thousands of military vehicles, thousands of men, and they needed a lot of money to survive. And then the NATO and many Arab governments are fighting them. I mean, it's about 20 countries fighting those group of 20 or 30,000 terrorists, and took them about 7 or 8 years to finish them off. And probably still now they're coming back in Syria. How come? So how come how would these people do to those NATO if they, let's say, fight Russia? If they couldn't just subdue 20,000 lightly armed terrorists? Anyway, we don't know. So this, and they, as we said before, those ISIS, they only go to Muslim Sunnis, towns and villages. They are just like a plague, much worse than the COVID. When they land somewhere, then the Americans and their allies, even Arabs, air forces, that means ISIS is there, then bombard the whole place. ISIS landed in Mosul. Mosul was a beautiful city, and this is what happened to Mosul after ISIS landed there. And you wonder if those people, there's a claim that they are anti-Shia, anti-Americans, anti-Kafirs. I don't know why they don't go to Kafir countries. They only come to Muslim countries. This picture, what you see here of Mosul, is almost the story of every Sunni cities now in Iraq and Syria, whether Hims, Halab, Hama, Mosul, Tikrit, all the cities, this ended up like this because ISIS has been there, and they call it Sunni force, right? Because of ISIS as well, look what happened. Thousands of tons of explosives, right, which is remained scattered throughout the Mosul, while many residents have started returning as after they got rid of ISIS. The UN Mine Action Service estimates it could take another 10 years for the city to be cleared. Since ISIS came, the statistics that I called you, not doubled or tripled, no, fivefold. 5.5 million Sunnis are refugees. As we said, 2008, there were 1 million before ISIS. After ISIS, in the areas of North Iraq, that's where ISIS came, 500 million refugees that they had to flee to Kurdistan, to Syria, and to Europe, wherever they can. And even in their own country, they are displaced there. So with all this thing now, it's because, as I said, internal rivalry, the Shia started realizing as well, right? We've supported this, let's stop this now, right? We supported Iran, we supported the Americans. What happened to us? So the Shia said to himself, we should be at least better off because we take the whole petrol now. It used to be divided by Sunni and Shias, probably unfairly or fairly, I don't know, because Saddam was never sectarian, to be honest. His aides were either Christians, Sunnis, or Shias. I mean, in the top Shia, Ba'ath, that's the party of Saddam Hussein, Echelon, 52, that, you know, there's 52 personnel that the Americans wanted to kill when they came there, the most wanted top officials of Iraq during Saddam time. Out of the 52, 37 were Shias, but not a single Shia was executed or a Christian. All those who were caught and executed were the Sunnis. Anyway, the Shias after that, they realized that we are not better off now. So start murmuring and talking. In a country that I said the second biggest producer of oil, they don't have electricity to switch on at home. So even in the summer, their fridges are off, the air conditions are off, and they only get electricity for 2-3 hours a day or a night. And they're still producing oil. Where's the money going? People say to Iran, we don't know. To run all these 126 militias, you need a lot of money. So now, in the past year or 2 years, actually, almost about not more than 2 years, the Shia started now demonstrating because they cannot resist those 126 militias, as well as the Iraqi army, the Iraqi police. They started complaining. Why are we so poor? Why we are without employment? Why we are worse off now? And they start comparing them, and then their fathers, the previous generation, they start comparing their lifestyle under the one they hated most, and they said he impressed them, Saddam. Life under him was much better. So they started now complaining, going in demonstrations. And who stood up to the demonstrations? The militias. The militias, they come there, they've got their own clothes, which is not military, not the official military Iraqi clothes. They come with their own uniform, but with their faces covered, and they shoot at the people. They killed quite few hundreds we're talking about. And people realize it was them who was doing this. So there is a Shia now, Arab Spring there. And those Shia, I have to admit, they are not sectarian, those who are doing the demonstrations, etc. But they realize that their enemy is their own government and Iran at the same time. And well, Iran, their government is the same. But the poor people, I mean, they left it too late, right? They fell for the Iranian trap. And any demonstration now is met by shooting, really. They don't mass shoot them, but every time they make sure 10, 20, every time there's demonstration, 10, 20 are shot, either killed or injured. And then what they do, well, they send people with plain clothes that mingle amongst them, cause trouble, and they are having probably just as bad time really as the Syrians or as the Yemenis. But at least the Shia start to wake up now and realize that their enemies are not the Sunnis. During the Sunnis' rule of Iraq, which has lasted 1400 years, not a single Shia was killed because he was a Shia. Not a single Shia mosque was destroyed or demolished or taken over. But since 2003, the Muslims lost more than 1,000 Sunni mosques to Shias. And people who, with particular names like Abu Bakr and Umar, it is not safe for them to be in Iraq anyway. It's not safe. Any Shia militia will ask you for your ID, name Umar, Abu Bakr or Umar. They either shoot you on the spot or you disappear. Life is very hard for Muslims there. Unfortunately, this is the status of Muslims in Iraq. Only Allah can help them.
Right. Okay. Jazakallah khair for that introduction, brother Abu Bashir. Now, brother Abu Bashir, you spoke about the United States. Of course, the United States has caused that destruction when they invaded Iraq. Now, the supply of, you said about maybe 20 foreign countries are actually involved in Iraq also. Now, amongst those, there is I think the NATO nation, what we say, are there, led by United States. Russia has as well a role there in Iraq. Now, Turkey is as well because of the boundaries with Turkey and as well. You know, what about the Kurdistan problem as well?
The
Kurdistan.
Okay, but let's just a little bit of correction. Turkey and Russia were not involved in attacking Iraq at all.
At the beginning, yes.
They were not. No, neither Turkey nor Russia.
Right.
No, they did not. Turkey, I mean, the Americans put a lot of pressure, but fortunately, Erdogan was prime minister at the time. See why America needed 20 countries to fight a third world country. America was really afraid of Iraq. They thought that Iraqis have got a lot of weapons because of the war with Iran. The West supported Iraq a lot. Why? Because they thought that the danger of Iraq is less than the danger of Iran if Iran wins the war.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they supported them, and then they thought they had a lot of weapons, a lot of missiles, etc. So they were afraid to go on their own. Not only that, one region afraid. The second is they knew they were going to commit massacres and genocides. So they wanted partners with them, really. Mm-hmm. So they won't stand alone. And I think this is the main reasons, because America could destroy Iraq from a distance. They don't have to enter there. But they knew that, I mean, I'll just tell you the size of the genocide there. When in the first days of the war, 2003, when the Americans started shelling Iraq, in the first few days, I think week or so, the amount of explosive they threw at Iraq is equal to 13 times the amount of the nuclear bomb that they threw on Hiroshima. 13 times the size of the nuclear weapon, right? So they knew there were going to be many genocides. Now Kurdistan is a lesser problem. North of Iraq, Kurdish people live there. And they, from the beginning of the 20th century, they start claiming that this is our country and something to do with the Arabs, something to do with Iraq. This is a Kurd, and they call it Kurdistan. Stan means a state, like Pakistan, yes. Hindustan, etc. State. So probably a common name in that part of the world. Stan means state or land. So during Saddam's last few years, he gave them semi-independence, like a federal government he made between him and them. And they ruled themselves really during his time, especially the last 10 years. They were ruling themselves. Again, they had two corrupt parties, one led by Barzani and one led by Talibani. Again, their leaders for the past 56 years, the fathers to sons. So again, like monarchies, even those socialist parties, they are monarchists in reality because they always pass it on to their sons. And we thought socialists didn't believe in that. Like Hafez al-Assad passed it on to his son, right? And that's, again, he was socialist. So they had semi-autonomy from Iraq. And when the Americans came, they stood by the Americans, the Kurdish, right? And they did not resist the Americans, and they supported them. So they gave them more independence, but they wanted to be a fully independent country. The Kurdish wanted to be a fully independent country. But somehow the Americans did not sanction that. I don't know why. They didn't sanction that. The Iranians will not sanction it as well. Why is that? Because there are another big chunk of Iran, again, northwest of Iran, where Kurdish lives in adjacent borders to the Kurdish of Iraq. Again, they want independence, right? But America doesn't care about Iran. So why the Americans are not sanctioning this? So the poor guys are just in a semi-autonomy. They rule themselves, but the money that comes to them is what the Iraqi central government in Baghdad allow them to have from the oil production, right? Anyway, they've been almost independent for what, 20 years now, and they showed very little progress, to be honest, as well, because of the
Now, before this, what is the position of the Muslim countries? You know, the international.
You see, when you talk about Muslim countries, are you talking about Muslim people or Muslim governments?
Okay, we have the separation between, I think, we talk about the states as well, the governments first.
We see, let's talk about the people first. The people there, they cannot help them. They can't help themselves. Each country has got its own similar problems of corruption, of dictatorship, and you cannot cross the border and help the Iraqis. You can't. They call you terrorists. And you got to help yourself. You are in trouble themselves. You can't ask a sick person to help another sick person. No. You can't. So most Arab countries are ruled by dictators. So the people there are helpless. We don't have democracy. We cannot say even our opinion openly. Say your opinion, you'll go to prison. As for the Arab governments, each government has got each Arab government have got two agendas only. One agenda is their own security, right? That has got precedence of over everything else. The security of the leader, Sisi, or the Algerian generals, or the Hassan al-Thani, or Muhammad, whatever his name is, this, right, or King Abdullah, there's own security. So and because they spend so much money and effort in it, there has not been coups recently, right? There hasn't been coups recently in the Arab world, well, recently in the past 30 years, because those people, they make sure that, as I said, they spend all their effort, all their time, all their money, or most of it, most of the country's money on their security. And saying that, look at that. Most Arab armies, or not Arab armies, not all, probably all Arab armies, in the past 30 years have moved from armies to additional security forces. That's what they are. I mean, the Egyptian army is not there to protect Egypt from outside invaders. The Egyptian army is there to protect the government from the people. The same with the Syrian army, the same with the Jordanian army. So all those Arab armies there now are auxiliary forces to help the police if they fail. Really, that's what they do. That's all security forces. So the Arab armies, we don't have Arab armies anymore now. It's all, you can call them policemen, but they're called soldiers. That's what the Arab armies. The Arab government, I said, there are two agendas. The first agenda is their own self-security. The second one is to support their backers from the third world, from the first world, from the superpowers. So each country is affiliated with a Western power, some with France, some with Germany, some with America, some with Britain, right? Some with Russia. So, for example, the Syrian Al-Assad is affiliated with the Russians. They got to give him protection, and Iran. But his first priority is his own safety, and then the interest of the superpower that support him. They're not interested in Iraq or Iran but actually they are all the Arab leaders are against the Arab Spring. All of them, 100% of them, because they know it will reach them one day. Inshallah, it will. They know this. That it started with Tunisia, and then spread to, which I spoke last time, to 3-4 Arab countries: Tunisia, Egypt, then Libya, then Yemen, then Syria, and now Iraq. And then now Algeria as well. So they know it will spread. It will come to them, right? It's like slow, like COVID, doesn't kill everybody, but kills few people. Right.
Right. The odd thing about the United Nations.
United Nations. Actually, it's not United Nations. They call it United Nations, but to us, United Nations has always been a superpower political club. Really.
Yeah,
it's
for the
superpower.
The interest of the Security Council.
Well, yes, the Security Council decides everything, right? Without the Security Council, you won't get anywhere. So the Security Council is ruled by the superpower, 5 superpower, and they sometimes agree and sometimes disagree. But they've never agreed to genuinely help the Muslims anywhere, whether from Pakistan to Kashmir to Bangladesh to Muslim in Africa to Arab countries. I mean, they have not implemented one United Nations resolution against Israel, while they have enforced every United Nations resolution against Arab countries, against Jordan, against Iraq, against Yemen, against Syria, against Palestinians. So United Nations, that's it. It's nothing to do with us, really. This is one more establishment that's fighting against us. We can never get any positive things from there. We get a little bit of sympathetic talk every now and then. That the UN Secretary General talks about the need for a 2-state solution in Palestine, and they talk about giving a little bit of donations to educate Palestinian refugees. Just little paracetamols. That's what they give them. That's all. No, United Nations is useless. If people are relying on United Nations, that means they're not serious. We have to forget about United Nations. We are dealing with superpowers that they've got, like gangsters. They've got their own club, and they decide. And sometimes they compromise. Like when America wanted to invade Iraq, they wanted the United Nations cover. Look at this. They would, and just Chinese, the Russians did not vote for or against. They abstained. If you abstain, means you are for it, but shyly, because you could say no. If you say no, that's a veto. Because each country, with the 5 United Nations permanent members, have got the right to veto, and with one veto, no, the resolutions will not pass. So 2003, America wanted a cover from the United Nations. I said they were afraid of their records of what you call it, genocides. So at least they say we are doing this legally. So Russia abstained because they didn't want a stronger Iraq as well, powerful Iraq. China was against it. At that time, there were hard negotiations going on for 20 years before that between the Americans and the Chinese about two matters. One of them was that China wanted to join the World Trade Organization, so they can have trades according to the standards of United Nations throughout the world. And America was blocking them because America could feel the economical danger of China, right? So America was blocking it, and by this making trading with China very difficult throughout the world. I mean, people like us don't notice it, but as government, they notice this. For 20 years, the negotiation going on, and it has to pass through United Nations resolution that allowing China to join the World Trade Organization, whatever it is. So there were secret negotiations. All of a sudden, they allowed them. And something else, they had to pay another price. The Chinese were importing from America and the West as well, but especially from America, computers. And we're not talking about PCs and laptops, etc. We're talking about huge mainframes, huge computers. But there was one computer that America would not allow any country in the world to have without their permission, and that's called the supercomputer. Suddenly, as I said, on that day of 2003, America allowed the Chinese to buy the supercomputer from America and to enter the World Trade Organization. So somebody asked, what is the supercomputer? As I heard this on BBC at that time. What is the supercomputer? The answer, the supercomputer will make it easy to manufacture atomic bombs and make them more effective and smaller. They didn't mind the Chinese to have it as long as they did not veto. And the second day there was voting, and China voted for it. So Chinese look after their interest. They don't care about Muslim world, or they don't care about justice. Their interest as well. But the only one who cares about justice in the history of mankind are the Muslims. The only ones, believe me. And there are individuals. Yes, there are, Allah even said about the non-Muslims, منهم المؤمنون وأكثرهم الكافرون. Some of them are true to their word, are good people, and others are rebellious. Kafirs. They reject the truth. So there are individuals who are good people in this world. I don't deny this. But as institutions, you won't find justice other from. Look at the minorities in the Muslim world and the whole world. The minorities, all minorities are safe in the Sunni world, and minorities are not safe anywhere else. The Hindus in Pakistan are safe. The Muslims in India are not safe. The Christians, the Jews are safe in the Sunni world. But the Muslims are not safe in a Christian controlled or dominated country. And people say, well, they are safe in Europe because Europe is not Christian anymore. It's a different matter, right? And then plus they had other reasons. But let's say Eastern Europe, more Christian, and the Muslims are not safe there. And Bosnia is a recent example. And at that time of Bosnia, I think in Hungary or Romania, you were not allowed to call any Muslim name. So brother, this is why Muslims tolerate minorities, but others don't. Why? It's a good question there I'm asking myself. Only, as I said, even, okay, just to finish this off, Muslims, Sunnis in Iran are not safe. Shia are safe in Sunni countries. In each Sunni country, there are few Shias. I mean, the Sunnis, whether majority or minority, have ruled Iraq for 1400 years. They never persecuted the Shias. But from the first day they ruled, they start killing. You show the statistics. Million, well, almost 90% of the Sunnis now are in trouble in Iraq. 90%, believe me, not less than that. And in Syria, again, 90% are in trouble because Shia are ruling. But the Sunnis are not safe in Iraq and in Iran. They're not allowed to learn the Arabic language. You know that in Iran? The Arab Shias, Arab Shia in Iran, and Iranians by nationality, but originally they were Arabs. In Western areas of Iran, they're not allowed to. If you learn Arabic, you are Wahhabi. Or they are just Sunnis.
Now the
let's finish off, please. Let me finish this off. Why Sunnis tolerate minorities? Right? Because this has been going on for 1400 years. There has not been a genocide or attack on the minorities because an order from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Man adha dhimmiyan faqad adhani." Dhimmi is a minority. Whoever harms a minority, he has harmed me. That doesn't exist in Shiism or in the Bible or in any civilized or non-civilized constitution. There is nowhere in the constitution that says you cannot harm minorities. There are some rules due to influence of the Jews. You can't harm the Jews in Europe, but it doesn't say you can't harm the Muslims. It doesn't say you can't harm minorities. It doesn't. It's not in Switzerland. It's not in the United Nations, not in America. You cannot harm. This is the peak of civilization, right? Where the Prophet ordered us, says, if you harm a minority, you have harmed me. If we harm a Jew who hates the Prophet ﷺ, who hates him, who doesn't believe in him, if we harm him, as if we harm the Prophet ﷺ. This is one of the greatest signs of civilization. Yes.
Therefore, this is where it comes down to last. I think we have about 9 minutes.
Okay.
The NGO, non-governmental organization, and you spoke at the end that saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that whoever harms a minority, like harming the Prophet ﷺ in his person. Human rights organization and their roles in our world now. Human rights are actually now is a global issue now, and Amnesty International, you see a lot of people trying to do petition about the Uyghurs, about people in prison in Egypt, wherever, and you find a lot of things going on in the internet about human rights organization. Do you think those NGOs can have a role in reversing this trend?
So these NGOs are very restrained by their governments and by the people behind them. Sometimes you find them good people, honest people, etc. But that's when it suits people behind them, really. For example, the NGOs never showed us anywhere in the world what the settlers in Palestine do to the Palestinians. They never told us how many olive trees they are cutting off or destroying every day, or how many Palestinian houses. Every now and then they come and they criticize the Sisi, and they criticize Sisi or Arab government, especially when they imprison journalists, but not when they imprison Muslims. They hardly. Now everybody talking about the journalists in Saudi Arabia, about the liberals who are in Saudi Arabia prisons. What's about the 1,000 plus scholars who are in prisons? Nobody mentioned them. Brother, okay, these people, there is a little bit of use of them. It's good to support them as well. At least some innocent people will leave the prison because of them. But they're not as genuine as we Muslims, that justice for all. They believe in justice for some.
Therefore, what you said, that no justice, no peace is very, very valid, still valid, yeah? Justice is a key to bringing peace and prosperity and security to the whole world. What is the future? What is the future, for example, for Iraq now?
Well, the future for Iraq, inshallah, I think the future of the Arab Spring is good. I know it doesn't look good now, but the future, because the Arabs have gone into the right directions, and that is confronting the corruption of the governments head on, regardless of the price. In Iraqis as well. I think the future of Iraq, because of the extreme poverty there and extreme exploitation, there will be an infighting between the Shias, even those people, the militias, they'll end up fighting each other, and hopefully they'll finish off each other and solve the problem for us.
All right, mashallah. This is thank you, inshallah. Therefore, it was, I think, very good insight about the Iraq as well. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring peace, security, and prosperity to Iraq and to all those hotspots, which in our days are more mainly in the Muslim world. And I hope, inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring peace and justice to those places as well. And of course, thank you very much for your contribution and insight as well, and thoughts as well. Until we, inshallah, we meet again, inshallah, next week, and we cover another Arab Spring place as well. Until then, we say, Jazakumullahu khair, we say, Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nashhadu wa nastaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم العصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.